Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Before we get to the Prime Minister, we'll get Chief Burns up here.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Creator for blessing us with a wonderful day. I'd just like to not take too much time, but I'd just like to, introduce one of our ministers, Minister Patty Hajdu.
Thank you, Chief Burns, Chief Head, Chief Sanderson, Prince Albert Grand Chief Hardlod, and FSIN Chief Bobby Cameron, and really to the entire community and all of the people here. Thank you for welcoming me back with such warmth and such kindness. I felt it when I was here in the summer, just after the terrible tragedy, as I attended the funeral of Gloria Burns, and you were also welcoming even in your moment of grief. And I think that says a lot about the heart of your community. I'm wearing this shawl today because it's a symbol from some friends of yours, the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, who I was just with. And they gifted this to me yesterday. And they asked me to wear it because they wanted to send their love and their thoughts to all of you. And so I want you to know that it's not just Meadow Lake Tribal Council. It's tribal councils, Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people, Canadians, who are thinking of you all the time and how your recovery is going and worrying about you and praying for you and hoping for you. I was really honored today to meet with so many family members who told us stories of their loved ones, of the challenging journey they've had since the death of their loved ones and the recovery that they've been undergoing, but also how far they have yet to recover. It's like that, isn't it? Healing. We take 2 steps forward and we feel a little bit better, and then the next day can be just as dark as the first day. So I want to acknowledge the courage of all of you to take this journey together. And I want you to know that the Government of Canada will continue to be here with you as your healing continues. I'm really honored to work with the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, who many of you had a chance to meet today. It's such an honor to have a Prime Minister leading this country who has true heart. This is a person who you feel safe talking to, even if he's your boss. I've cried on his shoulder too, and there have been many moments in my journey where I've trusted him with some pretty tough stuff. And we're lucky to live in a country where we have a leader like that, who can sit and listen and be with people in their time of sorrow. And so with that, I'd like to invite Prime Minister Justin Trudeau up to say a few words.
Tansi, good afternoon. Thank you, Wally, for your welcome and your leadership. Thank you, Patty. I know how relentless you are in your commitment to building safer communities for everyone, your incredible hard work at Indigenous Services, and your thoughtful leadership right across the country. I want to thank Chief Burns, of course, and the James Smith Cree Nation for having us here in Treaty 6 territory today. I appreciate you letting me be here with you today, letting me grieve alongside you and continue to support in the very difficult healing process you're all going through. In September, all Canadians were shocked and heartbroken by the horrific attacks in this community. I know you're still reeling and still processing what happened and what took place. And I know from the conversations I had that members of the community are still grappling with it every single day. Earlier today, I got to sit down with a number of family members to hear your pain, to hear your anger, to hear also your hope for the future and your doubts that it will get better. I know this isn't easy. I know how overwhelming this still is for all of you, I know, too, that as happens, news continues to happen elsewhere across the country, and Canadians who were standing with you and heartbroken during those first weeks of September are now reflecting on other things. So this opportunity to gather in front of Canadians, all of us, and remind them that this is a community still grieving, healing, community still resilient, strong enough to talk about your feelings and your anger, and sharing your stories with me. Continuing to share your stories with Canadians, some for the very first time. Thank you for sharing the stories of the people you loved, who've each contributed so much to the community. Stories about Bonnie Burns and Gregory Burns, Earl Burns, Lydia Gloria Burns was rushing to help. Carol Burns and Thomas Burns, who were in visiting and weren't supposed to be here this weekend, that weekend, got swept up in it. Lana Head and Christian Head. Christian's brother asked me to share a picture of him. And they talked about how much of a gap and a hole in their lives, their heart, has been left by his absence. Wesley Peterson and Robert Sanderson. These are not just names. These are not just part of a number of people in this horrific attack. They're all individuals with stories, with a future, with a past, with people who love them, people who will be remembered. Aujourd'hui, j'ai rencontré des familles des victimes ici dans la nation Cree, James Smith en Saskatchewan. Je les remercie d'avoir partagé des histoires des proches qu'ils ont perdus dans cet événement tragique. On va toujours se souvenir d'eux. Plus tôt, j'ai aussi rencontré les chefs et les membres du Conseil. Je leur ai dit que notre gouvernement est là pour soutenir la communauté. Today I met with the chiefs and council members, Chief Burns, Chief Sanderson, Chief Head, and council members. I thank them for their leadership through difficult times. We talked about how the community has been affected and what it was like in the days and weeks that followed, and what they're still going through now. We also talked about the need for improved policing and community safety, and the need for better mental health and wellness care. And our government is here to help, both in the immediate and in the longer term. Proper care and interventions can help avert crises. This is why access to culturally grounded mental health and addictions care are so important. All members of our communities should have access to the type of support they need. So today, we're taking action to improve access to care for the people of James Smith Cree Nation. We'll invest $40 million over 6 years to build a new wellness center here in the community and to repurpose the existing Saquatamo Lodge to address immediate needs. Today's announcement will enable James Smith Cree Nation to develop and design the programs that best serve the needs of its members. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce qu'on va investir 40 millions de dollars sur 6 ans pour bâtir un nouveau centre de mieux-être ici pour la communauté de la nation Cree James Smith. Ces fonds vont aussi servir pour réaménager le pavillon Saskatchewan afin de répondre aux besoins immédiats. Our government will also invest $2.5 million over 5 years to increase access to holistic treatment and healing services in the community. This includes traditional and cultural supports and long-term care for those struggling with substance use. More access to mental health and addictions care will help create a safer and healthier community for everyone. Tout le monde devraient être en sécurité, peu importe où ils vivent. C'est pour ça qu'on a lancé l'initiative Voix pour la sécurité des communautés autochtones plus tôt cette année. Earlier this year, we launched the Pathways to Safe Indigenous Communities initiative, which builds from our government's commitment in implementing the federal pathway to end violence against Indigenous women and girls. With this initiative, we're supporting Indigenous communities so they can develop community-based safety and wellness projects. And today, we're committed to doing even more. We'll invest a further $20 million over 4 years to top up the Pathways to Safe Indigenous Communities initiative. This means that more Indigenous communities across the country will have access to funding for their projects to keep people safe. And of course, an important part of supporting community safety is also policing. Our government knows we need to work together to improve policing and community safety services. Last month, Minister Mendicino was here, and he talked about some of the work we're doing with First Nations in advancing First Nations police services legislation. With the Prince Albert Grand Council, he announced the development of a community safety plan that meets the specific needs of your community. We will continue to collaborate to ensure that First Nations policing is recognized as an essential service. Our shared goal is to make sure that people feel safe. In the aftermath of tragedy, you've shown remarkable care and resilience for one another. Healing is something that takes time. But as you continue along the healing journey as people, as families, as communities, our government will be your partner every step of the way. Merci, thank you. I'm now happy to pass it along to Chief Robert Head. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you, guests. Thank you, chiefs. Today is a wonderful day for James Smith Cree Nation, the membership of James Smith Cree Nation, and the future children and grandchildren that we raise. We're so happy today. You know, when you love somebody, you go to their house, no matter how far it is, and you walk over there and you knock on the door and you come inside and you have tea and you sit down and you talk to those people. That's how it is in this community. And that's what Prime Minister Trudeau did here today. He came and talked to us individually, face to face, and he found out what it truly meant to go through the tragedies we faced. You know, it was a very awful day, September 4th, but the way they died was the bad part of it, but the lives they lived was the good part that we remember and we uphold our loved ones today. And those memories help us through into the future. And that's the spirit that we move in forward of this healing center that we're going to be building here in this First Nation. It's going to be a great place for all of us to be able to go, and we can adapt to the future with the new strategies of health and well-being for our people. I can just imagine those good days ahead. And I just want to thank the Prime Minister and thank the chiefs and thank all of the ministers here that have worked on this project, because it is so needed in this community, and it's something that we'll be working toward making a reality, and I'm just so happy I can't say any more words. Thank you very much. I just want to thank the Creator for another beautiful day of life, and to be thankful for each and every one of us for our good health and well-being. Ego se. Just like to call up Chief Sanderson.
Organization has got now Gakeok, Uskapiok, elders, youth, and the helpers that helped us this morning to greet our Grand Chief, I call him. And on behalf of the band members here today, the victims, I shake your hands for what you had to go through this morning. I know it was very difficult to discuss something like that. I'm also grateful that the Prime Minister came here and honored our requests, a facility finally where we don't have to use the school anymore to gather for our wake services and our funerals. And I'd like to thank the school, the educators, the youth for allowing us to use the school. But I'm very grateful too for our ministers, the reverends, our traditional healers, our mental wellness workers. Now we'll have a place of our own where we can come and gather personally to discuss our personal issues, to heal ourselves. And I know it's going to take a resilience from each and every one of you as band members. You know, I met the Prime Minister so many times, and he's always open to shaking hands across the country. He takes that time, and I'm very grateful that he took this time to come and grieve with us and to lay the tobacco and the offerings there for our loved ones. It was an honor. On behalf of our elders that are also hurting. But now we got a new generation that's coming up, and we can finally have some kind of healing process for ourselves. And I just commend you. He says, call me Justin, the Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It was an honor to be with us at the sites and to explain the history of our membership, the resilience that they helped us with, and to continue that healing process. And our ceremonies, the ones that lifted up the pipes this morning, the shades, I'm very grateful. And let's continue praying and helping one another, because we're not done yet. It's going to take some time. I understand that. It's going to be a while. There's another process we have to go through with our membership in the next little while. And we'll see how that goes in 2023. And thanks, Prime Minister Patty Hajdu. And hopefully we can have another follow-up meeting when we're in Ottawa, because we have a few more asks to ask for our government here. But safe travels to your home fire, and I'm very grateful for any of your visitors. Safe travels to your home fires. All my colleagues, my counselors, James Smith, Peter Chapman, Tagaste Florence, Derek, Gillis, Barry, Justin, Alvin. You know, we're all here together, Valerie. We're all here to try and help. And we'll be here to try and get this thing moving for you. And let's build it for ourselves. Maybe get our youth to hammer one nail, even to allow them to do that for them. So I would say thank you very much, and it's an honor again. And safe travels. Thank you.
Wally, you can stay up here if you want in case there's any really tough questions. I'll let you take them, but happy to take questions from the media now.
So, journalists, the mic is over to my left here, and if you can say your name and your outlet, it's one question, one follow-up. Ça va être une question et une question suivie par journaliste. On va commencer avec la première journaliste, first reporter.
Hi there, good afternoon. Sam Sampson from CBC National. How long until there is legislation for making First Nations policing an essential service?
We know how important it is to make sure we get it right. For far too long, the emphasis on keeping Indigenous communities and First Nations communities safe has relied on to be honest, colonial structures. We need to make sure we are working with leadership, with the communities, to design the right system for them, and that is exactly what Minister Mendicino is focused on. That's why he was here just a few weeks ago to launch consultations and a process with the Prince Albert Grand Council. There is work to do. We want to get it done as quickly as possible because we know how pressing the needs are in these communities. But we also know we need to get the framework legislation right. There have been conversations ongoing, of course, with the province and with provinces across the country to move forward on First Nations policing. We understand the pressures, which is why we're moving quickly on supports, but getting First Nations policing legislation right at the federal level is going to take the time it takes to get it right.
The goal was for this fall, though. Do you think that deadline will be made?
I'm sure Minister Mendicino can speak more directly to that. We are hopeful that we're going to move forward as quickly as possible.
There are several other communities across Canada that are also hoping for funding like James Smith is getting, which is fantastic. But even speaking with some people here, they also acknowledge this is not, different issues here in James Smith happen in other communities. So what do you say to people in other communities who are hoping for help to prevent tragedies?
Yeah. We have continued to invest right across the country. This government has been partnering with Indigenous communities on the systemic challenges being faced, on the cycles of intergenerational trauma caused by residential schools, on the issues around mental health and addictions that are faced by so many Indigenous communities across the country. And we are not working just here. We're working right across the country with communities, as you point out, facing similar challenges, but each one is unique and each one needs to be at the center of what they need most in terms of healing and paths forward. That's why we are there as a government with resources, with capacity to support, but Indigenous communities, First Nations themselves need to be at the center of building the solutions they need. And with this, I'm happy to pass it over to Minister Hajdu, who can speak further to it.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and you're absolutely right. There's a need for healing programs and healing centers across the country, but the Prime Minister is absolutely right. What works in one community is not necessarily the vision of another. And so the work that we do on the Indigenous mental health and wellness strategy, for example, together with First Nations people, helps chart that path with the flexibility in how money is accessed and how projects move forward. And for too long, as the Prime Minister has referenced, it's been the Government of Canada that has determined what programs should exist, has designed the programs, and I think I look at the band councillors around the room, have meticulously controlled how money is spent in First Nations. And piece by piece, we're transforming that process as a country. We're saying to communities, listen, we know that you alone are the people that will have the answers for how to move forward. And so it is not easy work. It is often not fast enough for everybody, but certainly it's the focus that we continue to have, whether it's transforming policing, as you asked about earlier, transforming health, transforming infrastructure. That's the work that we're doing together with Indigenous partners. Thank you.
And next question from Global.
Nathaniel Dove, Global News. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about the timeline for this treatment center as well as the services there. I'm wondering when shovels will be in the ground and when patients will be in the center.
Good afternoon once again. First and foremost, I'd like to answer your question in a proper way. It's going to be the timeline and where we all have to get together and do our strategic plan. Not once a day goes by in regards to how we're going to address this and how we're going to build this. You know, it takes a community to build one significant other, which we rely on in regards to making our community safer and also healthier. So working together in a collaboration with level of governments. I think our timeline starts right now, and hopefully next year we get something on the ground, and from there, hopefully that the Minister and Prime Minister are here to cut the ribbon with us and share that celebration. So with that, thank you.
And follow-up?
I'm wondering if I can ask Prime Minister, you and Chief and the other chiefs here about the Saskatchewan First Act. It's been heavily criticized by the FSINs. They say it tramples First Nations Indigenous rights. Hoping to hear your thoughts on that.
My focus is and has always been on working constructively with other orders of government to deliver for people who live in communities across the provinces and across the country. That means working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, working in partnership with provincial governments to deliver on the support, the growth, the opportunities, and the abilities of everyone in Saskatchewan to succeed. That will always be my focus. We're there to work collaboratively and in respect, but we will always ensure that we're respecting Indigenous rights and putting the fundamental rights of Indigenous peoples at the forefront of every conversation we have.
So just with that, moving forward in a transition where we both are all three levels of government understand each other, and the initiative, I think the work is going to be ongoing, especially with First Nations, because First Nations are always looked upon where they're at the bottom, but we are resilient people, and I think having our task team, all our memberships together, it doesn't matter what First Nations they're from, working in collaboration on how we focus this agenda forward. So with that, thank you.
And next question, please.
Kelly Malone, the Canadian Press. The current Indigenous policing program has been criticized for underfunding those services and not being accessible to nearly 1/3 of First Nations and Inuit communities. As my colleague earlier pointed out, the federal safety minister is pushing for legislation to declare it an essential service. So how would you ensure it has sufficient funding to recruit and keep officers, as well as train and outfit them to the same level as other police forces in Canada? And when is the earliest any of these forces could possibly be deployed?
Well, we have already been moving forward in many communities on First Nations policing across the country, but we know there are many more to do. And like I said, recognizing that First Nations policing is an essential service is an important legislative step. But it is also extremely important that we create the capacity and the reliable funding pathways that will allow communities to stand those up. And that's where close work with provincial authorities and their responsibilities over policing is going to be essential as we move forward. We know we need to do this more quickly. We know, and hearing from families who suffered through the tragedy of September 4th, there are so many what ifs. What if there had been police quicker on the scene? What if we had been able to act on this faster? What if there had been proper prevention and follow-up before? We don't want to continue to wonder what if. We want to be able to see communities kept safe in an active way, and that means creating strong, robust First Nations policing to be of the community, from the community, and in the community. There's work to do to get there, but there are things we can and are doing in the short term as we set that up.
Follow-up, Kelly?
So chiefs have also spoken about the need for housing in relation to safety, and now there are at least 4 families waiting for homes here connected to this tragedy and others in need of repairs. There's been promises, but the housing gap on First Nations remains vast. So how will this federal government approach the housing needs here and in other Indigenous communities, especially as we talk about health and safety?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just in that, I like your question. Just in regards to housing, yeah, there's 4 families that were in need of housing, and the housing is there. Just that the transition from here to there, it takes a long time. So when we get the units into the community, well, we have to look at the power, all the utilities, and all that. So we're hoping within a couple more weeks they'll be inside the unit. So with that, thank you.
And thanks for the question. And the government has committed to be, the federal government has committed to be a partner here in James Smith Cree Nation, both on the repair and restoration of units that can be repaired and restored. And I know a lot of that work has already happened, but you're absolutely right. There are some units that cannot and family members that are waiting. We'll be there to support financially with $1.2 million for those units that need to be replaced. The chief and the council, Chief Burns just mentioned that building a house can't happen overnight, unfortunately, but there are obviously supports for accommodations that for people that are displaced, and those supports will continue. In terms of the larger need for housing, absolutely, and that's why our government's been focused on closing that housing gap. But there's a long ways to go, and people know that. And it will take effort, it will take commitment. In some cases, it is about resources, financial resources. In some cases, First Nations communities across the country are running out of land. And when people run out of land, there's a complicated process to add more. I won't spend a lot of time speaking about it today, but it's lengthy. We're working to accelerate that process. And finally, the civil engineering that Chief Burns just spoke about that sometimes needs to happen before a house can even be built. The water delivery, the electricity, the subdivision development. So we're going to continue to work with First Nations on that, I think, most critical question of housing, because it is the foundation of safety. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll take the last reporter, CTV.
There's been a lot of talk about the justice system failing Miles Sanderson. He was a member of this First Nation as well. And his early release failed the community here as well. So what does the government plan to do to ensure that mental health, addictions treatment is addressed while people are incarcerated, so they're not provided with early release and sent back to communities with no aftercare or means of a community to handle a person of that nature who's been through those things in his lifetime?
Yeah. This is something I heard directly from families as well. Obviously, a parole board makes its decisions independently, but making sure that people are accessing the proper kinds of mental health supports and addictions treatments while they're incarcerated is a piece of it. Making sure that communities have better resources to deal with the epidemic of drug use that people are dealing with right now, the challenges that go with it. We're seeing a very, very difficult situation, not just here, but in communities right across the country. And we need to make sure we're continuing to use all the tools we have to keep people safe, to help them through their addictions and mental health challenges, and make sure that with the proper community supports, we don't see repeats of potential or preventable tragedies. You want to get to this?
So to your question, yeah, it was a struggle finding a ways and means in regards to why the system failed our people. Dealing with that situation where a release was made by the board, and the board not notifying the First Nation is another. And I think working in collaboration on how to fix the system, it takes not just one people, but it takes a whole community or a province to try fix what is unbroken. What is broken. So I think dealing with the whole area on justice, I think that's one of the things that we're trying to comprehend and trying to fix this whole ordeal. And I know for a fact that dealing with the situation where the release, again, we're talking about the release, there was no information that was sent out to either or the chiefs at that time. So we don't know where this whole thing failed and how to regain momentum in regards to mental health especially working with the addictions area with the individual that's incarcerated. So that's one of the things that I always talk to my elders about in regards to why do our people always have to go to jail? Why can't we bring them back to our ceremonies and talk to them in the appropriate way where, you know, as a traditional person, dealing with our traditional ways and looking at it and why do we have to pay the price in regards to trying to teach our people in the right way? So that's one of the things that me as a chief, I really have to ponder in regards to the system itself too. So I know there's many questions that have to be answered, not only from me, but the families here, the families that are in the community. And, you know, we got to come together and solve this problem. So with that, thank you.
And follow-up?
Just a follow-up for both the Prime Minister and Wally Burns. Will you be working together more to ensure some of this funding is used for aftercare for people who are coming out of incarceration?
We're there as a federal government with resources and funding. We know how important it is for communities to lead and to determine what exactly is most needed. This is why we work with Indigenous communities across the country to establish priorities. This is the work that Ministers Hajdu and Miller do every single day to make sure we're responsive, to empower Indigenous communities to be able to prioritize and respond to the things that they most need. Our job as a federal government is not anymore to tell people what it is they need to do or to tell them what the solutions are. Our job is to be there with resources, with support, with all the tools necessary for Indigenous peoples themselves to be at the center of building stronger, more resilient communities, anchored in traditional knowledge, anchored in language, anchored in culture, anchored in identity that for far too many decades, generations, and even centuries has been devalued, marginalized, and attempted to be assimilated. Our role as a government is to be there to support. And that's not as fast as being there to say, okay, you need a community center here, we know how to build it, so we'll just build it for you. You need a new health center there, we're going to send you a few more cops, and then everything will be fine in your community. That's the kind of colonialism that broke this system. It takes longer to work with people who for decades hadn't been asked their opinion on community safety or on education or on health, where colonial structures came down and told them what it is that they needed to do. So before we can even get to establishing all these different infrastructures and community supports, we need to be there to do the slow but essential work of building capacity to answer those questions. There are communities that are going faster than others, communities that are facing more challenges than others. And our responsibility as a government is to be there to accompany them as long as it takes, while at the same time putting everything we can forward immediately to support in temporary ways the needs, the very real needs of these communities. Anyone who says the road to reconciliation is easy is wrong. Anyone who says the road to reconciliation is just about a federal government and Indigenous peoples is also wrong. It takes all order of governments, sure, but it also takes all Canadians to be part of it. For decades, Indigenous people were in residential schools being told that their identity, their culture, their language had no value. But the thing is, every other school in this country was teaching non-Indigenous kids that Indigenous culture, language, identity had no value. We have a lot to undo. We have a lot to unlearn. We have a lot to build together. And this government is focused on doing that. It takes a while. And that's why the combination of immediate supports with long-term building is the only way to get through, to build a Canada in which everyone can feel valued, respected, and fully able to achieve their potential.
Just to add on or supplement to the question, I'd like to thank Mr. Darrell Burns, working in an area where, dealing with programs and holistics, alcoholism, and also the stress that came with the job that he does. It was always underfunded in that area. And that's one of the things that I'm very happy with the Prime Minister and the ministers and, the rest of Canada. Working in collaboration on funding programs which is needed the most. And I think, to me, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work that has to be done, not within in our community, but out there. Dealing with our community. During this pandemic, we've seen a lot of people come back into our community, which left us in distress, overcrowding again. We did an assessment back in 2006. James Smith was rated #1 in overcrowding. So we did a plan on how we can bring back our housing. We took it right down to the floor, the wear and tear of a floor, a doorknob, a switch, everything that pertained a house. We had 18 people in one unit, and still today, we're still overcrowded. So dealing with all the factors with COVID, restrictions, staying in one unit, that's not healthy. The mental health piece was another piece where, a lot of our people get anxiety. Look at the situation that occurred. There's a lot of things that came out during this time. So I'm very fortunate that it took this here in our community. But we are thankful, we are resilient, and we're honored. We're honored to have the Minister Hajdu and our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is the second Prime Minister to come into James Smith. Back in '68, there was another Prime Minister that came and visit. So at that time, there was no people like this surrounding him. That's how open we are. But now, we're so, protected by people, good people. And I'm very thankful for my people and our community that surrounds us and guides us on how to move anything forward. So with that, I thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you. That concludes today's press conference.